We talk about the myth of living a balanced existence. The reality is, if you're focused on a work goal, this idea of being all in on one thing, you'll be very out of balance in a lot of areas of your work life. A lot of people think I'm working hard for my family, and they're envisioning some time in the more distant future when they're financially free and get to spend all of this time with their kids. And one, that's not guaranteed. You could get hit by a bus or an asteroid could fall on your city tomorrow. It just like, we don't know what's going to happen. And if anything, this world's making that clearer and clearer to us. So you need to make much smaller bets. So that's counterbalancing.
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. I'm your host, Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and my mission here is to help you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. Whether you're a brand new listener or a longtime listener, I want to thank you for being back for another episode. The title of today's episode is The One Thing: How to Get Extraordinary Results. This is a conversation with Jay Papasan. He's the co-author of the book, The One Thing. He's also the co-author of another book that I always recommend to people when they're first getting into real estate investing called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. And in this conversation, we talk about one of the topics that I think is so fundamental that we don't get into in the show enough, but is your mindset and your approach to the practical little things, your habits, your day-to-day routines, your mindset about what you focus on and what you don't. Because we all know that we are overwhelmed. There's lots of things going on in our lives. There's lots of things tugging at our attention. Some of them are important. Some of them are not so important. But he really dives into what makes people who achieve extraordinary results, whether that's personally, having a life that you can be proud of with your family, with your health, with achieving personal goals, but also professionally and in your real estate investing. How do you get those things done? How do you accomplish the things that you see your people you admire do, and the people who have been successful in your field or that you look up to or your mentors? What do they do that's different than what most people do who don't achieve those results? That's what we talk about, kind of like looking under the engine of successful people. That's the conversation I had with Jay, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. Now, before we get to the interview, it's time for my weekly behind the scenes segment where I share a short snippet of what's going on with me in my real estate investing, my finances, my business, or my life behind the scenes. Now, as you can tell in my background here, I'm still here in Clemson, South Carolina as I record this, when I record this interview with Jay today. But as this is published, as you get this, I had to record this ahead of time because I'm going to be traveling. Our family is transitioning to living in Spain. And I thought it would be a good topic just briefly to touch on in this behind the scenes segment about how The One Thing, the book that we're talking about today in this interview, has affected my own approach to business and orienting my life. And this trip is a really good example that for me and my wife, this doesn't mean that this is for everybody, but going abroad for 12 months or these long mini retirement type trips is one of the key kind of cornerstones for our family. It's just something that we think is really important. We enjoy doing it. We think it's a top priority. It's one of our one things for our family. And so we have built a lot of other things around it. For example, some of them are pretty profound, some of them are pretty silly, but for example, our real estate investing business, getting big and doing lots and lots of projects and being very busy with remodels wouldn't fit into us being able to go abroad. So although I could do those and there's money on the table to do those and there's opportunity there to do that, it hasn't been something that I prioritize because of some of the personal goals I've had, like traveling and going abroad. Another kind of sillier example that if that's my one thing, if that's our one thing as a family, we actually don't have pets for the moment. Not that we don't like animals, not that we don't want to have them eventually, perhaps. Our daughters ask us a lot for them, but because of wanting to travel and not being able always to take them with us, we've just personally chosen not to have them for now. And so it just shows you like the philosophy you're going to hear in this interview about the one thing is such that you prioritize, and it's almost like a compass in your life. When you start getting really clear on the few things, like the one thing in your personal life, the one thing in your business, the one thing in your investing, and it orients a lot of other decisions. It makes other decisions simpler. And for other people, it might seem kind of silly, the decisions you make. But when you have a priority and when you have a focus, it really helps you make clearer decisions. And that's just one example for us. Being able to do this trip to Spain has a laundry list of other decisions that you can't do. You have to say no to in order to say yes to that one thing. So my encouragement to you, just that's an example for me, figuring out your own one thing as you listen to this conversation with Jay can be a really enlightening approach if you do it for yourself and find your priority and find your focus, and then let some of those other decisions that might seem hard at the moment kind of fall into place as you get clear about that one thing. If you like these behind the scenes segments each week with the podcast, I want to invite you to stay in touch with me beyond the podcast by checking out one of the online courses that I offer. Online courses are a way to interact with me and let me help you with your real estate investing. Some courses are available anytime, and others, like my premier course, Real Estate Deal School, is more of a boot camp style course where you and other students go through live with me as I help you step by step to start purchasing your next investment property. You can get details on all of these courses at coachcarson.com/courses. Now let's get started with the interview. Hey, Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chad. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. And it's an honor to interview you for a couple of reasons. One, I first ran into your work with the Millionaire Real Estate Investor, and which is it's on my permanent top 5 real estate investing book list. So I'm always recommending it. And, for the right person, I'll buy that one. Other times I have Building Wealth One House at a Time, another one I always recommend. But definitely at the top, I just admire that work. And I want to talk to you today about, as much as I can, about the one thing. And it's been really impactful for me as an entrepreneur, as a person. And I was taking a look at some of the stats on that book, and correct me if I got some of these wrong, but I guess about 9 years ago, it was published and it's sold over 2 million copies since it came out. Is that correct?
2.7 and over 40 languages now.
Unbelievable. I'm not surprised because it's such a packed book. And I wanted to ask you, like, looking back 9 years as an author after preparing that book, for it to sell that many copies and for it to make such an impact, clearly there's some sort of nerve that it struck. There's some sort of problem, challenge that people just really said, all right, this is a book that helps me in a problem that's very acute for me. And as looking back at this, and now that you've been able to talk to a lot of people who've read the book, do you have an idea or a clear idea what that was? What is that big nerve that people keep coming back to the book for?
Well, first off, let's just say that there's some luck involved. I've been, in my whole career, which spans over 25 years, I was also an editor. I got to work on a book called Body for Life that sold millions of copies. It was not my authorship. I was just an editor. And then I wrote The Millionaire Real Estate Agent with Gary Keller, and that is 1 million copy in this one. So I've seen it 3 times, and I can just tell you definitively, there's a little bit of luck. And anybody who tells you otherwise is kind of full of themselves.
Right.
You have to take advantage of the luck you're given. So I think that the luck we got is this was a book that was very true to what made my co-author Gary Keller, a self-made billionaire. Of all the things he's really good at, he's really great at prioritization, at figuring out what the most important thing is. And then he's brutal. Like, he just won't talk about anything else. Mm-hmm. And it drives you crazy in a meeting. If you're number 2 on the agenda, good luck. Because if we really don't nail number 1, we never get past it. Mm. And so I love that as a co-author, because when the book came up, and it took us 4.5 years, almost 5 years to research and write.
Wow.
So we were working on it for a long time, and we look up, and I just remember when the book was proposed, I thought, well, great. I love this. As my old editor's hat came on, I was like, this is someone not speculating. This is someone, and I knew him because we'd already written a bunch of books together. He was willing to do the hard research, but his hypothesis, he'd been living for a long time, had a lot of validity. And I think what happened for us, I'm getting back to the luck thing, I think people were reaching a place where the number of opportunities and obligations that they faced every day was really getting to a place of overwhelm. The speed at which our modern lives were moving was really hitting an inflection point. In 2007, when the iPhone came out, that was like a tipping point in the whole world of work-life balance. It was one thing for some people with BlackBerries to be at work all the time, but then students and everybody else all of a sudden had access to everything they could do at work, most of it email, right, all the time. And we had no defensive mechanisms. And I think that showed up and was really building to kind of a maximum kind of place right when the book came out. Even though that's, I want to say the last one, this idea of a balanced life being a lie is the last of the big ideas that we cover in the book in terms of the things that are wrong. That may have been the thing that so many people were feeling out of balance when they walked through the bookstore and they saw that white book That was another look. And this was our publisher. That was methodical, actually, to try to make sure that we really stood out and solved one thing. And I just remember our marketing director, we were going to call it the success habit for a while. And Ellen said, that sounds hard, but when I hear one thing that's going to make a difference, like, tell me what it is, please. Like, I want to go and I'm going to investigate. And so it was provocative on a certain level. If we'd called the book Focus, like, nobody would have bought it. Like, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it was a combination of things, but the timing, which we couldn't control, really turned out in our favor.
Yeah, the word I was going to use is provocative as well. And it's one of those that even when you think about the idea and somebody says, well, you need to concentrate on one thing. If I had to speak for like that problem that, as I see it as well, which I think still going on since the iPhone, it's only accelerated, right? How people are like, I'm overwhelmed. I've got text messages coming in and out. I've got hundreds of things I'm focusing on. And for you to say, what? No, one thing is what you need to focus on. Is like, what? Really? I've got to, even if I don't believe it, I've got to read this book. So just congratulations on that. And I think
thank you.
It's interesting to understand. I'm writing a book as well. I told you that offline, and just understanding my audience first and what really are they trying to scratch at? What is this thing they're trying to do? And I feel like this is so relevant to not only real estate investors, but anybody who has something bold that they're trying to do in their life, but they're doing something different, going against the grain. This book is so relevant to that. And I want to dig into kind of the core premise of what the promise in the book is that everybody's doing hundreds of things, doing lots of things. But if you want to do something bold, if you want some extraordinary results, whatever that means for you, you've got to go super, super narrow and super small. So could you unpack that for us a little bit and just kind of help us understand, maybe just if somebody's just hearing that concept, what does that mean to go small?
Okay. And I'm going to go back because there's like three things I wanted to say in that little thing. So I'll give credit to our Ray Bard, who is the founder of the Bard Press that published the book. And we're now working with their new publisher, Todd Satterston, who's equally amazing. But when we were talking through kind of like, what problem are we solving? Like, this book has got you said an itch that they were trying to scratch. I like that, because when someone's itching, they do something about it. They either scratch it until they have a scab, right? Which is what I used to do a lot. My mom would yell at me, or they go get medicine because it's an irritant. And I think that the best books in our space, self-development, personal health, finance, they're helping people solve a real problem, one that they may not immediately recognize they have, but they can quickly recognize it. And there's a deep attached pain to it. So Ray, I remember him drawing it out for me. He just drew one of those matrix, where you have the cross, and from left to right, it was felt need, from low felt need to strong felt need. And then from bottom to top, it was small market to large market. So how big is the audience and how strong, deep is the felt need? And then he labeled the quadrants, and up here is ocean. And he goes, Jay, what lives up there, it's deep. There's a lot of people and it's a deep felt need. This is, I'm up to my eyeballs in debt. Think Dave Ramsey. Like, he's got a really good business model, right? Mm-hmm. People who are overweight. Look at the bestseller list every January. It never goes away. There's like 6 new bestsellers every year around the pain of, I don't feel good about my body. And you can just go down the list, and it's not a long list though. And they're almost all, they're not aspirational books. They all tend to be like, I'm going to help you fix a really big problem. And then the other quadrant you want to live in is the well. And that's where it might be a smaller market, but it's a really intense need. And our first book, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent, was that. And that was a book where a lot of people, a growing number of them, is like the total number of real estate agents when we published was like 700,000. And we've sold 1.6 million copies of the book over the years. And it's because so many of them said, I don't want to be a salesperson anymore. I want it to be a business person. And our book was the only answer to that at that time. So anyway, I think that works. Like, when that conversation, when he walked me through it, he goes, that's the way I think about investing, man.
That's brilliant.
Like, people who make the most money are willing to solve the biggest problems.
Right.
And all right, so that's a massive aside. So going small, even though I'm clearly bouncing around a little bit on you today, most people think that to solve a big problem, they have to show up, in full football gear. They strap their Clemson helmet on, which I can see in the background.
There you go.
And go charging at it, at 1,000 miles an hour. And really aggressive people who get a lot done, that's just kind of, they just go bouncing through their days like a pinball, problem, boom, boom. And they're swinging a big sledgehammer at everything. And that generates a lot of activity, but it doesn't always generate a lot of long-term productivity. And so the whole idea of going small is think about like focusing the light of the sun, right? Until it gets to a tiny pinprick, and it will, like a laser, burn through almost anything. And when we really harness our energies and aim them all at the same place, even for brief amounts of time, often that has a much larger impact than all the sound and fury of the big action. The problem with big action is it almost always feels like a shotgun blast. Boy, look at all of that, but it's not very precise, and a lot of it isn't super lasting. So I'll stop there, but that's the whole idea of just getting really honed in on the thing that matters most about the things that you want to have happen, and see if that doesn't do a lot more of the work than you thought it would do.
Yeah, I think you did a good job describing the typical, what people feel busy. They feel like they're making progress to a point. Their days are filled up, and yet there's this emptiness at the end of the day. Like, wait a minute, like I'm not really making progress on that real estate investing goal I had, or I'm not really making as much money as an entrepreneur that I thought I would, or I'm not really connecting with my family that as much as I thought, as I want to. So there's that gap. And what you're saying is that the problem is not doing all that stuff, is you're doing too much. You're not focusing enough. And
they're doing too much, right? They need to do the right thing, and they need to do it for a lot longer than they think. And I think most people don't really understand what big success looks like and how long it takes to get there. And you know this, there's a million GIFs out there on the web that people give up right before the payoff. But anybody who's been listening to your podcast and learned about compound interest, right? It's like, it feels like nothing's happening, but then you look up and 20 years later, you're like, holy crap, I've only got 10% left on the mortgage, and the value's gone up and the rent's gone up. And you think about the long-term implications of something that's very, very small. I have a renter who's paying off a little bit of the interest and maybe a little bit of the principal every single month. But over a long enough time span, it has a massive impact when you combine it with the other things that are happening. So I think most people just don't realize it's time on the task over time. It's not the amount of time you throw at it on the front end. It's really about just that constant input over a long period of time does massive amounts of work for you.
One of the beautiful metaphors in the book that just really, when I first saw it, the image of it, of the domino effect, of just this idea that you could have the very end, this huge, enormous domino, a moonshot, something as tall as the moon. And all it takes is that staying, like you said, doing one thing at a time, setting this domino up. Could you describe that whole process and that metaphor of the domino?
Sure. I mean, I went to compound interest because of the nature of your audience. I figured, but that is it's one of the hooks in the book early, is this, we were looking for a metaphor for how people could interpret the one thing and not hear the only thing. And that was something we always teach things before we write it down. Like, we want to test the audience, and we're kind of teachers at heart. So that's a great way for us to kind of iterate on the material without the pain of writing drafts. And this idea of the one thing, I mean, people would just throw up their hands like, what do you mean one thing? There's always a lot of things. Like, get out of here, right? They literally just couldn't even hear us. So the domino, like everybody who's listening to this, has lined up dominoes as a kid. And if you line them up perfectly, you knock over the first one, they all fall down. And so the idea, quote, of lining up your dominoes means that we have a bunch of junk to do. But when we prioritize the right thing first, a lot of the other stuff is either a lot easier to do, like they have this momentum knocking them down, or they're just not necessary at all. And we'll get to those specific words later on, I'm sure. But there's this idea of the domino run. And so I was doing all this research around, like, well, who set the world record? And there's like a group in the Netherlands, and I think they still hold it, from 2009, that knocked over almost 4.9 million, I believe, dominoes, which is just insane to think about.
Yeah.
There's how many times did someone like me bumble through the door with coffee and knock them all over before it was done, right? That's all I can get around, is like, I'm a big guy. I bump into stuff all the time. Like, they would have not let me anywhere near that.
There'd be some padded shoes and some kind of shock system in that room.
Oh, it was like humidity controlled. I ended up doing a deep dive like I do on a lot of stuff that I'm interested in. I'm a little OCD when it comes to investigating. So the other thing that we found, and I'll credit Kyla, who was our research assistant at the time, I believe she or Vicky found an article, and it dates back to like 1983, like in the American Journal of Physics, a guy named Lauren Whitehead wrote an article about dominoes. That's how it showed up. And he figured out that a 2-inch domino could knock over a 3-inch domino, and a 3-inch domino could knock over a 4.5-inch domino. And as a French English major, like I'm going to stop trying to do math. But basically, each domino could knock over one that was 50% larger. And that kind of blew my mind. I was like, what? Like, because he said, I think he lined up 10. And by the 10th one, it was like as big as a door frame. And he described it like what started with a gentle tick ended with a loud slam, because he built them out of wood to test the theory. And so I immediately went out to Excel and I just said, well, what does this look like if you just keep going? Because obviously he couldn't keep building wooden dominoes. And I think it's by the 18th, you would knock over one. I don't have the book right here in front of me. And unlike some authors, I don't have it memorized. That's not the way my brain works. I think the 18th one, starting with a 2-inch domino, but growing at 50%, it would knock over one the size of the Leaning Tower at Pisa, right? And by the 23rd, it would knock over one as tall as the Eiffel Tower. And the Eiffel Tower is almost as tall as the Empire State Building. Most people have no clue how tall that building is. You get about, I don't know, 30 something into it, 33 maybe, and you're 3,000 feet above Everest. And it's the 57th, maybe. You can test my knowledge. It would actually reach from the Earth to the moon. That's the moonshot. But people are going, okay, that sounds really cool. Obviously, that's not reality. But if you imagine it looking like a hockey stick, laying on its side with the heel going up, that shape of a hockey stick, flat, 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 and then this just tremendous burst, that is kind of what I would tell most people is what extraordinary success looks like. There's a lot of effort put in. It feels like a lot's not happening until the train has got so much momentum, it's almost impossible to stop. And you just talk to top achievers and they'll just tell you it's that I just woke up every day, I'm writing a book. I wrote 5 pages a day, or I wrote 5 words a day. You name it. If they describe to me a lifestyle habit in order to achieve a goal, I'll bet on them almost every time. Because that usually, when someone says, I want to write a book, and it's like, well, how are you going to approach it? And they say, well, I'm going to look for free time. I'm like, yeah, good luck. They say, I get up at 5:30 every morning and I'm going to write for an hour and a half. And as far as I get, that's as far as I'm going to go. I'm like, okay, man, let's talk. Talk to me when you've got about 30 of those days under your belt, and we'll see how that's going, and I can help you. Because that's the kind of momentum building activity that people grossly underestimate.
What's brilliant about that metaphor, Jay, for me is that that final domino, you picture that moon-sized domino, or in our life, we're real estate investors, we're building wealth, we're trying to have a profession. We can imagine that huge, enormous goal that we even scared to think about, but it's out there. But yet the same metaphor brings it all the way back to like, what do you got to do next? Like, what is that habit that you talk about? And I think about you talking about your co-author, Gary Keller, coming into the meeting and having one thing on his mind. That it's a way of life. It's a habit. It's showing up. This is my one thing. That's him for that day, at least, I guess, putting that domino and lining it up once again, right? Just doing the next domino.
As long as I've known him, like many, many years before this book, like he writes little quotes for himself and leaves them where he can see them. Maybe like an Olympic athlete that puts a picture of the gold medal on their mirror, but he collects Bibles. That's one of he collects antique things, Bibles, like guitars. There's a few things he collects. And one of them was Bibles. And so one of the things he has a lot of are these like almost like music stands that are there for displaying these old giant Bibles. And in one corner, I've seen 4 different offices that he's worked in. He'll have a corner and he'll have like this little brass stand, and he just has a piece of paper, and it was written in Sharpie until it got yellow, and then he'd replace it. And it just says, until my one thing is done, everything else is a distraction. And like, I never even asked him about it before we started writing the book. I just kind of thought, yeah, that's Gary. Don't be the distraction, right? But that is fundamentally a great attitude to have, because it's actually doable. That's what I love about the concept of the one thing. Anybody that can find a little bit of right of way in their day, whether it be 5 minutes or 50 minutes or 5 hours, they can start this process and build up momentum. And I just know that people who stick with it, it compounds and it always blows your mind.
Well, that was gonna be my next segue, because I want to bring this back to the concept. I think people are going to get that and they say, okay, that resonates. Here I am in my life. I'm a mom. I'm a dad. I also have a job. I'm doing this real estate investing thing on the side. I'm volunteering in my church. I'm volunteering in this thing. I'm want to travel. Are we back to like the 100 things we're doing? What is even the next, like when you're mentoring people or recommending things, or educating them, like what's a process that you can start to whittle down towards that habit that we're talking about of doing the one thing? Is it just doing a little bit at a time every 5 minutes in the morning, or is there a process that you would go through or recommend?
Well, there's really like 4 steps. First off, you have to figure out like, what is it that you actually want? And that's a lot harder than it sounds.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people say, I want, right? Do you have kids, Chad?
I do. Two daughters.
Okay. How old are they?
11 and 9.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's a fun age. Okay.
Yes.
Not quite teenagers, still old enough to do like roller coasters. Yay. Good for you. Enjoy. I've got an 18 and a 16-year-old. Different story. Love them to death, but it's, they can do lots of fun things and they're teenagers, which is a whole different. So, they'll tell you what they want. And it's usually like, how committed are they? Like, have they asked for a pet yet? And they promised that they would take care of it forever and ever, all of those things. Like, I don't know your kids, but most kids make all those promises and then they're bored with it 3 months later. And it's mom and dad's job to walk the dog and all of everything else.
Yep.
That's actually life. Most people aren't really clear about what they want and why they want it. So when someone says, I want to be a millionaire investor, or I want to be a best-selling author, I kind of fall back on a few fundamental questions to help them. And also for me to decide whether it's worth me giving my time if they are asking for my time. And I'll just ask like, so which of those, what do you want to roll with for the role play? You want to be a best-selling author or a millionaire?
Let's do millionaire. Let's go that route. I think we have some millionaires on the line listening to us.
So you see, we can so why do you want to be a millionaire, Chad?
Because I think money will give me lots of options.
Yeah. So that question, why, almost always elicits the dream answer, right? It's not a pain solving always. It's usually about a positive outcome, financial freedom or options, security, whatever that is. Great. Awesome. When do you want to get it by?
So the sooner the better. So if I'd say 5 years from now, I'm done. I'm ready to have that freedom sooner.
5 years. Okay. We can work with that. If I told you it might take 2 or 3 times as long, would you still be interested? Yes. I'm committed. I'm ready to do it. Like getting a sense of how rational they may be about the timeline, right? Like I'm not saying what's impossible, there's probable. To make yourself a millionaire in 5 years or less is going to require there's a very narrow set of things that people can do to make that happen, and they're not guaranteed. If someone tells me that they're willing to give it 15 years or 10 years, now we can go to a set of things that's still narrow, but they're almost guaranteed to get the outcome if they follow them long enough, right? So you kind of get into that. And the last one thing I would ask, what's the consequence, Chad, if we look up in 5 years and you've failed? What's the cost? The cost is missing out on time with family, opportunities that I could have done, things that matter to me. I feel like I'm not in alignment with my values, spending my time at my job now. That's a common one I get. And that's really not a bad one if people are feeling it. I usually want to hear something, there's some deep emotion. That's actually the real question. Okay. When you ask people what's the cost of failure, they usually go to, well, my son can't go to Juilliard. And that's been, our lifelong dream for him, or whatever. Like it can often get to something very specific if you peel that onion and you get to something, or there's not. It's like, well, I'd probably be happy with 500,000. Gotcha. And I'm like, okay, now we're getting to where you're actually motivated, because if you go from $1 million to 500,000 in net worth, you probably go from 500,000 to 2. You're not willing to actually make sacrifices to get there. So getting to the why. Like, why is this important to me? What's the cost of failure? That's a great motivator, because if you have to do something for a long time, you need something that there's a real consequence to failure, because it doesn't feel like you're winning, but you've got to be committed to not losing. You know what I mean?
Yes. So that commitment, that emotional decision that this is important to me is what you're getting at there. And if people are journaling on this on their own, which I would recommend, if they can rewind that, listen to that question you just asked them, be kind of your own mentor and say, why am I shooting for whatever I'm shooting for? How important is it to me really? What's the consequence of that if I don't get it? I love those questions.
And how long am I willing to work for it? Right. So it's usually why, how long, and what's the consequence would be the short form. And just kind of journaling around that. It's a great suggestion, Chad. And actually, if you have someone in your life, my spouse is that for me, and my writing partner, that are willing to really challenge when you give in easy answers, having that person review your answers with you, someone who's willing to call you on your BS, is really a great step as well. Yeah. So I usually start with that. Like, do they have a fundamental why? And then it's just, we have to figure out what's the core activity. And at the heart of the book, we have a thing called the focusing question, which is surprisingly effective, and it's wordy. So I'll have to count on you putting it in the show notes.
Yes.
But it's, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else would be easier or unnecessary? It's a big question, but it does lead to big answers for people. And I was worried when we wrote the book that people would never know the answer. And having taught this to tens of thousands of people, right, in the corporate trainings and whatever, it's surprising how many of them actually absolutely know the answer, but they've been so busy and distracted, they forget to ask the question. So it's there, and when the moment they ask it, they just feel guilty. Oh, I'm not spending enough time with my family, or, oh, I should be saving money for college, or, oh, like, boom, whatever it is. Usually they go straight to that place you went, which was around like regret. And regret's a powerful thing that most people want to avoid, though it is hard to fuel day to day with avoiding regrets.
Yeah, and regrets is one of those, we think about the exercise, you're on your deathbed looking back, what would you regret? Yeah. It's a powerful emotion, and it's a scary emotion. But it also, I love the quote before you gave this question in the book, you gave a quote or aphorism that, life is a question and how you live it is the answer. And that's one I just circled and starred, because it's like, that's whatever that regret is, or whatever your answer to this question is, that's you living it, that gap between you doing what you know you should be doing and your answer to that question. That's the integrity gap. That's how much are you living in alignment? And to the extent that you're not, that's regret. That's the anxiety, So I just love that idea of the question.
It's easy to live every day and not think about that, though, right? So you have to be a little purposeful to kind of keep it out there. A lot of people will say, if you want to see what someone's priorities, see what they spend their money. And I think that is indicative. I actually think that if you want to see what someone's true priorities and values are, look at how they spend their time.
Absolutely. Agree. 100%.
So that's that quote, how you live it, right? How you live it is what you do with your time. And it's very indicting for most of us. You say, our family's most important. I say, great, let's look at your calendar, right? When you come home from work, are you still working, or are you home and present, right? Like, if we really dig under that, we'd realize that we're not living our values as we express them. It doesn't mean that we should change them. We should change the way we're living. All right. So step one, figure out why we're willing to do whatever it is. Because I'll remind folks, the subtitle of the book is about extraordinary success. We're not talking about average anything here. None of this applies if you just want to be average. If you want to be average, go do average things. But if you want something exceptional, like exceptional marriage, exceptional health, exceptional wealth, whatever that is, that's what we're talking about now, extraordinary. So why? Ask that focusing question. And the one caveat I give is, if someone's trying to improve their health, like a good example for me is, I use a lot, so I'm apologizing if you heard this in another podcast, but it's like, I want to reduce my stress. That doesn't work with the rest of the program. That's great. I've now identified my problem is I have high stress and I want to reduce it. What's the one thing I can do to reduce my stress such that by doing it, everything else will be easier and necessary? We need to go from a concept to an activity, because it's something that we're going to be doing habitually to get us closer to our outcome. So got that. Why are we doing it? What's the core activity that we believe today will drive our results? The next step is, we need to time block it. And this is where the rubber hits the road. A lot of people like get really quickly. They want to write a book. Well, I just need to write every day. That's awesome. That's actually like a great habit. I can show you so many talented, award-winning, best-selling authors that would tell you that same answer. So congratulations, you've found a great answer, however you got there. When are you going to do it? So navigating our time and making commitments with our calendar is remarkably effective. And we kind of call time blocking as making appointments to do your most important work. And most people look at their calendars as how they make commitments to other people. When are my meetings? When is the next Zoom call, right? When are we going on vacation? Those are all good things, right? Because this calendar invite in Outlook or Google or wherever you use to do it, it's now a shared commitment. And we know that. But the most important things that people put on their calendars are their commitments to their own lives. And when Gary first interviewed me, back in 2001, I started working for his company. And I think by 2002 is when I started working with him in 2002, but we did projects. So it was 2002. The first thing he asked, like when we were talking about writing together, he goes, "Can I see your calendar?" And I had no idea what he was looking for, but he wanted to see if I was the kind of person who put their task in their calendar, not just their social commitments. And being a tremendous introvert, right? Outside of my wife and my family, I've got a handful of friends that I see regularly. Right. I'm very happy. I just came out of quarantine after 2 years of avoiding it. I finally got it at a memorial service. Boo, I know, but I feel proud of my track record up to this point. But I'm one of the happiest quarantine human beings in the world, right? So he looked up and he saw it's like I just would have like what my most important things to do each week were. I don't know where I learned it, but like he just nodded. I should remember that. It took me maybe a decade to know what he was nodding about, though. So we're going to make commitments of time. And I think it needs to be at least for anything you want to form a habit, hopefully daily. If it's a work habit, I'll accept 5 days a week. Later, when you're getting advanced, you can try to set these kind of habits or once a week or once a month. But I think that's advanced once you've really bought into the system. Because in the beginning, you're just trying to cut a neural groove, right? Neural groove. So like at 5:30 a.m., I'm going to wake up and for better or worse, I'm going to start writing. And I'm going to do that for, I don't care, like you can actually do it for 5 minutes. Because the truth is, getting there, if you actually start writing, you're not going to get up until the kids have to get off to school, right? Something will stop you, but if you get on a roll, you'll keep going. So we usually call it like when we're coaching people and doing corporate, like people almost always ambitiously say, I'm going to start writing 3 hours a day. Awesome. Let's go back. That feels like the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Yeah. Start with that small domino. Get that.
Yeah. Let's go back to a smaller domino. What's something that feels like you could almost trip over it and declare victory? Because what we're looking for is momentum in our time blocking. And that's how you build a habit. And we can cut through all the research for people. It takes about 66 days on average to form a habit, not 21, not 30. So it's a lot longer than people think. And for some things, like if you're trying to quit smoking, it could take like 300 days. But basically, you make a commitment to keep doing it until it's almost automatic. I know that for me, at a certain point, like my wife and I started working out in the mornings, and we have to get up at 5:30 to do it. That's because we try to work out before our kids are up so that we could do it together and not have to hire a babysitter when they were small. I still set an alarm because I'm paranoid about letting our trainer down, but like we both wake up well before the alarm goes on. We've just trained ourselves. It's kind of sad. We'll be on vacation. We were, off in Lake Tahoe, and we're getting up at crazy hours when we should be sleeping in on our holiday because our bodies are just trained. And that's actually a good thing in the long run, right? So you're training yourself to do something, and that takes almost all the work out of it. So the last step is defending that time block. So why are we doing it? What's the core activity? I'm going to time block it so I can build a habit over time. But getting on your calendar is not the end of it. Like, how do I defend that decision? And there's a whole complex thing there. I mostly just tell people, if you want to cut to it, make sure that you're selecting an environment, we call it a bunker, where you can actually be productive, right? If you tend to be social, don't start writing in cafes, because every chance you get, you'll be striking up a conversation with a stranger, right? Me, I have no problem. I just tune out the world. My family has to tap me on the shoulder when they want my attention, because that's the way I'm programmed now. But you look up, just like find an environment where you believe you can actually do work. And it can't be something like on an airplane. Like a lot of people say they're really productive on airplanes because there used to be nothing else to do. Now you can
now they have Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Yeah. It's changed a little bit. It used to be, it was a very distraction-free environment. But so it needs to be some place that you can get to and control. And then, make sure you got everything you need while you're there, so that you're not constantly leaving the protected space to go get coffee or whatever. And then turn off your phone. If you're not like making client calls and that's the thing that you're doing, like just get your number one distractor out of your environment. And the final step is usually enlist help. Get the people who know where you're hiding from them, get their permission to say, look, Daddy from 5:30 to 7:30 is working on a very important project. And if he writes this first draft by my deadline, I promise we'll all go to Disney World, right? You make it a win for them, right? If it's just about you, most people won't respect it. But here's how the team wins if you can help hold me accountable. So if you see Daddy sneaking out for coffee, tell me to go back in. And I've done that very effectively. I'm good at following orders. I'm also good at giving them. But I remember I had a great EA, Teresa, was the first that really took hold of it. If she saw me trying to shirk off my writing time, whatever it was I was doing, she would just take it out of my hands. She'd be like, I'm going to do that for you. Yeah. Because if you don't write, you get fired. You get fired. I get fired. So go do your job.
Good accountability. Yes, that's great.
I know. And it's like, awesome. Thank you. I just got because it's so easy to distract yourself. I mean, when I used to write at home, I'd be like, man, I love my wife. And she would really appreciate it if I did the dishes right now. And you can justify it as a higher value. Like my wife's more important than the stupid manuscript. Like you just be crazy, the mental gymnastics that people will do to justify not doing that core thing, which goes back to that small domino. That's going to happen. You're going to have good days and bad days. So make your source of victory just a barely more than showing up, right? You're going to show up to do the work and you're going to do just a little bit, but it needs to be, hey, victory. I know I only got a few words down today and I may delete them all tomorrow, but I showed up. I did my number one job, which is showing up and trying to write.
Yeah.
I love the core process. If there was a cliff notes for the books, I just gave it to you.
It's brilliant. Those 4 steps, I hope people really take that to heart. And I love the practical side of that. You start from the big picture, the one thing, which to me is the hardest, in some ways is the hardest part. You got to spend a lot of time on that why. And I think you wrote in the book, Jay, that it's often, if you get stuck on that one, just go in a direction, go in the direction you think you're going to go, because you can't stay stalemated for the next 3 years. That's a constant thing. I'm still second guessing myself on the why. Why am I doing this Coach Carson thing? I love it. Some days I'm like, what am I doing? But then, you reconnect to that. But time blocking in particular, I remember when I first read that in the book, was one of those just like, aha, this habit is changing. Because I had one of my favorite books coming out of college was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so there was some of the time blocking in there, and it would, this idea of there's certain activities, and he had 4 quadrants. There's quadrant 2 activities, which are not urgent, but they're really important. Like nobody's going to knock on your door and say, hey, Jay, you should be writing, or Chad, you should be writing your 500 words for the book. Or if you're trying to do real estate investing, nobody's going to say, you should be looking at the listings today to see which investments look good. Nobody's going to make you do that. But yet that's for your one thing, that is that incredibly important activity.
Isn't that the Eisenhower matrix? It's been so long since I've read that book.
I can't remember where it came from.
There's urgent and important and non-urgent and unimportant. And I think that was the Eisenhower matrix, but I might be getting my generals mixed up. I don't know.
That makes sense. Yeah. It's one of those concepts though, that if you think about all those activities you've talked about today, like your exercise and your time with your family and working on your one thing, the writing your book, or work, all of those that fit in that quadrant 2, where they're not urgent. Nobody's phoning, texting you on the phone telling you should do that, unless you have an assistant who's helping you do that. But building your schedule, those time blocks was such a critical habit for me, a change. And now though, like you, like my wife and I go on vacation with exercise in particular, like this is just what we do. Like on vacation, we love exercising, or, eating, trying to eat healthy. That's a hard habit to change. But once you start putting that food in your pantry and make sure that's just, you enjoy doing that, that's what you do. It's a habit. So I think that practical side of it, if people can, whatever they're trying to go for, just apply those 4 steps, so helpful. It's going to make a big difference. And
I love that you're clearly living a big part of this. And I love hearing that. And I'll just say this, that's one of the things where Gary and I, we bring different things to the page. He's got tremendous experience in real estate and building businesses. And I have a shorter track record, and I think it's pretty good, but not nearly on the scale of his. I had a literary background. And so I brought different things to the writing, even though he's a fabulous writer. He's a musician. So he hears the sound of words in ways that I don't. So it's a very good combination. But like one of the things that if you can, the cheats on all of this, there are things that you can do together. And when you do them together, like working out with my wife, like you ask her independently, like, what's the thing that you think has been the healthiest habit of our marriage? Not just because it's about health, but working out together, it turned into like real time for us together. That it's one of those things that you come to enjoy. Like I actually don't like the idea of working out until I'm there. Right. I always feel great afterwards. So it's kind of like we're going to boot camp all the time and coming out with that foxhole bonding or something. But we work out issues in the gym. So there's people who start small. But over time, as you start living this time blocking, kind of one things, you can build like a handful, maybe 5 or 7 really amazing habits into your life over time that will transform your life and your marriage. And people, they always overestimate how quickly it'll happen. And they always underestimate how powerful it'll be when it does happen. And it's very validating when it does. And that's the addiction. That's why I almost always point people towards like an athletic goal, right? Why don't you do a 66 challenge around walking 10,000 steps or something, whatever, because you get the feedback loop really quick. Around 30 days into it, someone will say, wow, you're looking good. What are you doing? Right? You start getting the validating because physical activities tend to show up in our life. Anyway, I'm rambling now.
No, though I'm agreeing. I think that it all is connected, which I think you do show in the book too. That for us, it's a Wednesday morning date morning. We have the exercise and then the breakfast, and we're actually like morning and a little bit because our kids got out of school this last week, and now we're like, all right, Wednesday morning, what do we do to the kids? And we gotta do our date. So we're figuring out, but it's there. It's the habits there.
That's why we started so early, by the way.
Yeah, there you go.
Is that we did it before, like, I don't know about your preteens, but my teens, I'm not going to see them before about 8 a.m.
Right. We're getting to that stage. They're still getting up before me. I've got a night clock. That's just for better or worse. That's mine, but it's, they're all connected. And I want to go to one point that has kind of been in the back of my mind that I think a lot of people bring up when we say the one thing, and we've been talking about exercise. We've been talking about wealth building, and in my case, in your case, writing. There's this challenge of you have all of those things that we started with. You have, and even with the things that are important to you, you have family, you have wealth building, you have your profession. How do you approach, if there is one thing and all of those are important to you, how do you have so-called balance between those? And that was a whole chapter there about balance is not exactly, it's a little bit of a myth that we ever get balance, but how do you and how do Gary approach that idea of trying to have multiple priorities that you want to fit in?
Well, there's a couple ways I can answer that. So I'll try to hit them both, but in short form, and we can dive deeper if you want to follow up. But like, we talk about the myth of living a balanced existence early in the book. And the reality is, if you're focused on a work goal, this idea of being all in on one thing can be, you'll be very out of balance in a lot of areas of your work life. And that actually tends to be pretty healthy and sustainable in business. But it doesn't work for time spent with kids, time invested in your health, spiritual, all those other things. You need regular doses of those. So we usually prescribe to counterbalancing in our personal life. If we go through a period like you're working on a book deadline, or you got a big conference that you're preparing for, or you're starting up your side hustle, whatever that is, you know that there's this investment period where you'll be out of balance. Really quickly, you need to kind of even out the ledger. If I we usually do twice a year, big conventions that we host, and like 10, 15,000 people. And I'm on stage with Gary for a lot of that. And for the 3 or 4 weeks before it, it's very consuming. I don't have tons and tons of extra energy to go do extra stuff. And then I'm usually gone for like a 5-day period, just really absent, either physically in another state or I'm coming home late and exhausted. We almost always will take a week of vacation on the heels of those and try to kind of rebalance the family time and some of those other things. It's not the kind of thing that you can wait till you retire to do. I think when a lot of people think I'm working hard for my family and they're envisioning some time in the more distant future when they're financially free and get to spend all of this time with their kids. And one, that's not guaranteed. You could get hit by a bus or an asteroid could fall on your city tomorrow. It just we don't know what's going to happen. And if anything, this world's making that clearer and clearer to us. So you need to make much smaller bets. Yes, I can go for a couple of weeks for a big work priority, but then I need to take a few days off. One, it's good for me. And it also reminds your kids that that they know that they're a priority or your health, whatever that is. So that's counterbalancing.
Yes.
I'll stop there. Is that what you were going towards?
Yeah.
Or
something? Yeah. The idea of counterbalancing. And I think you brought up a metaphor in the book of, an elegant dancer who seems to have balance is actually like one muscle on one side is firing while the other muscle's firing back and forth.
Oh,
so that's
back and forth. Yeah, I usually get people if I'm speaking and that I don't always teach to that one. It's like if you have like an hour to teach, it's a lot to cover, but I'll get people to stand on one leg and I'll just say, great, everybody's on one leg. Almost everyone who's healthy can do that, right? And it's not like a dangerous thing. I don't have to get them to sign waivers. And I'll just say, great, are you balanced or are you balancing? And people are surprised by the question and they'll go, oh, I'm balancing. I was like, great, you can sit down now. That's the whole point, right? Having a balanced life is a balancing act. You have to actively do it all the time. There's no magical nirvana that you arrive at where everything just happens. Life, the moment you get there, life's going to throw you a curveball. That's been my experience. Yeah. Always. So the other half I'll go to, the only page I have memorized in the book is page 114 of the American hardcover. And it's where we talk about the 7 different areas of your life that you could apply it. So the other end of this is what should I focus on today? And I usually will open up that page and just get people to write the categories out. So it's your spiritual life, your physical health, your personal life, your key relationships, your job, your business, your money. And not everybody has a business, so that might just go away. It might be 6 categories, not 7. And I just say, when you think about those areas of your life, your spiritual life, your physical health, your personal life, like the things that you do just for you, your job, your money, your key relationships, rate them all on a scale of 1 to 10. So that's a real simple exercise that people can do. It's like a snapshot. What's the health of these different areas? And it's a quick way to get people to diagnose their most acute opportunity. And a lot of times, if they're in financial distress, that doesn't really show up until they're doing bills and they look at their checking account and realize that they'll barely cover it or they're having to borrow to cover it right. And then as soon as they get done paying the bills, we do a lot of things to suppress that until 30 days later. So this little exercise will surface that because you'll have to ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how's my financial life? Well, I'm living on credit cards. It's a 2. This is not sustainable. I know this. So they look up and I'll usually give people a choice. Identify your lowest number. If there's a tie, just do the same thing between them, right? You've got 3 chits. 2 go to 1 and 1 goes to the other one, period. And figure out where the tiebreaker is. So what's your lowest and what's your highest? And I usually say that the most productive use of your time is not getting everything to average 5. It's taking the thing that's causing you the most pain and getting it at least to average. Often you'll overshoot it and be better than average just by being a tiny bit purposeful. Or if you've got a superpower, your physical health, and that's the foundation for everything else maybe, or your spiritual health, whatever that is, go ahead and make that 8 into a 9. I think I'm okay with either, because having that supercharged area of your life that's usually the thing that we turn to when the other ones are suffering to kind of force things along.
Yep.
And either of those is acceptable, but 9 times out of 10, which one do you think people choose?
Probably I'm guessing the worst one, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's going back to the bestseller conversation that we started this thing with.
Yeah.
Most people are highly motivated to remove pain.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so helpful. I think that's, whether it's the different balancing parts of your life, projects at work, that exercise of prioritizing. And this goes back to the one thing of figuring out which I only have so much time in the day, I have so much energy in the day. You've got to choose. You got to make a choice. And there's one other thing you said earlier, Jay, that just to kind of wrap this part of the conversation up, you mentioned about the very first question was the big picture, why, and you were asking me those questions about timelines. And I found it very helpful to have a mentor, ask yourself those kind of questions like, okay, I thought I had to do this thing in a 5-year period of time. And it's taking so much pressure because I'm putting that pressure on myself, and just not changing the goal, but changing the timeline for that goal, moving that domino back a little bit, that huge domino back a little bit, can often take some of the pressure off of that area of your life that you thought was urgent, and all of a sudden you can work on your exercise, you can work on your other part of your life, because that financial goal, yes, is important, but you're just having it happen in 3 years is perhaps unreasonable given your other priorities in your life.
And the things that you didn't account for when you made the plan, which is almost always, right? The planning fallacy. Most people just don't really realize how many other things are going to be happening between now and then that are really going to be important. Someone's getting married, someone's dying. You need to they're all the little things that sound like distractions until they happen. And then you realize they're actually very important priorities. Not to suggest that going to a funeral or a wedding is a distraction. I just realized I said that. But the planning fallacy is very much at play.
Well, that's all of this, Jay. I hope people will rewind this and listen to it. So many gems in there. And I have my copy of the book. I took the physical the cover off of it. But
you're one of those. You take the jackets off the books.
Yes, I do.
But you got to see the Easter egg inside. Don't tell anybody if they're not watching the video.
Yes, I know. They'll have to watch it on YouTube to see what I just showed. But really appreciate your work on this book and what you've done with this. It's one of those books that I find the highest compliment in a work. If somebody read one of mine and they could keep rereading it, and every time you reread it, you get something different out of it, and you get a different layer of depth and help in it. That's been the case for me with the one thing. And so just really want to show appreciation for you and what you've done with it, and just encourage everybody else. Of course, I'll have a link to the book in the show notes and the work you do. Is there anywhere else people can follow you, Jay, if they want to stay in touch with you or see what you're up to and your organization's up to online?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for the wonderful praise. I appreciate that. As an author, like when you labor in the dark for a long time, you just want one reader to say that, right? If you can make an impact, then the work was worth it. That's for me, the driver there. And it was a team. It's Gary and me in the writing room, and at different times we had, 2 to 3 people helping us actively research all the answers. And our publisher, so I could go on and on about that, but you can read the acknowledgments if you want to go down that path. I'm here to take credit, but I won't take all of it. If people want to find us, I would just say go to theonething.com with the number 1. That's kind of home base for me right now until we get a new book out there. And it's the book that has had the biggest, this and The Millionaire Investor, the 2 books that we've interacted on are the 2 books that have had the most impact on my family. I thought the way to get ahead was just get a high salary and be an executive. That's what my dad did. And he did well. But it wasn't until I started working for Gary and he started handing me books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I started to whoa, there's this whole other world. What is this thing called net worth and all of that stuff? So massive, profound impact on my life, researching and writing that book. And then The One Thing, which has just been such a great, great gift to me and my family. So definitely check out theonething.com. And there's lots of free resources, and there's a podcast and all other kinds of fun stuff that people can dive into.
Well, highly recommend that. And I don't know if I said it earlier in the conversation, but the Millionaire Real Estate Investor also has been one of those big, impactful books as well. I think I did say that, but
yeah,
I'll put links to both of those in the show notes and the video description. And Jay, just want to thank you for your time. It's been really enjoyable to have this conversation, and hope we can reconnect again sometime in the future.
I would love that. I would really love that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jay. I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Jay Papasan as much as I did. If you did like today's episode, I hope you'll join me again next week. I have a new interview with someone named Antoinette Monroe. She's a perfect example of a small and mighty real estate investor who's done really well with just 4 properties. She has the ambitions to do a few more properties, but I think you'll enjoy her mindset and her practical approach that's allowed her to have passive income with a small number of properties. See you next Monday with the next episode. If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at coachcarson.com/REI Toolkit. In addition to weekly updates, articles, and behind-the-scenes tips from me, my email newsletter subscribers get my real estate investing toolkit, which includes a property closing checklist that I actually use when I buy properties, a real estate deal worksheet, a tenant screening criteria checklist, and other spreadsheets and goodies that will help you on your journey to financial independence using real estate. You can get it all for free at coachcarson.com/REI Toolkit. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make this podcast possible each and every week. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wynn, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps me behind the scenes and is my partner here at Coach Carson. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of this show who make everything possible. This show exists for you. It exists because of you. And I really appreciate you being here for another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I have not considered your specific situation or risks. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or a legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about helping you get out of the financial grind so you can do more of what matters. See you next time.